You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist, and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hello, podcast listeners. Woohoo! Welcome to 2020 and the very first episode back from a couple weeks break that I took. Thank you so much for allowing me to take a little time off and for just recognizing that I'm a human and giving me that space. It means a lot that I don't have to feel too beholden to this podcast. So I appreciate your patience. I'm so excited to share today's episode with Dr. Jen Hardy. We talked about the diet binge cycle and how it shows itself and manifests in lots of different areas in our life, including with how we eat and how we move, but also with how we spend our money and how we think about all kinds of other elements of our life. So Dr. Jen Hardy is a psychologist, and she has all this really relevant training in talking about this concept that we talked about today. She specializes in psychodynamic therapy, attachment therapy, and career vocational issues. She also is on Instagram at Dr. Jen Hardy, which I will link to, where she talks about relationships, career-related issues, resilience, and other psychoeducational topics. She is fabulous on Instagram. I'm always inspired by her, and her content just really feels real and practical and down to earth, and that's just what I appreciate so much about her. So we talked about this concept today. We thought that it would be a fun thing for us to explore, kind of this bridge between what we both do for work, and so I hope you enjoy. Before I dive into that, I do want to share a really exciting announcement. So I have decided to launch a membership program for the show. This is where you have the chance to support me and the show directly. I love creating Nutrition Matters content. I love reaching out to guests. I love connecting with wonderful people, including listeners. And it means the world to me that you all tune in and keep hearing me week after week. But it does take a lot of time and energy to produce. And I'm at a place with the podcast where I really do want to keep moving forward, and I want the show to keep going. And I want to invest in its growth and its ability to stay around, and for me to still have the time and the ability to continue creating content. So I want to invite you to be a partner with me in this journey. That's why I'm excited to give you the chance to officially become a supporter of the show. You can do this at glow.fm/nutrition matters, or by clicking the link in the show notes. This is really quick and easy. It takes less than 30 seconds, and it takes just clicking a link in the show notes and using Apple or Google Pay. You don't have to create any new logins, and you can contribute as much or as little as you like. The minimum contribution to receive the extra content that I create for subscribers and for supporters is $5 a month. So, and you're more than welcome to contribute more than that. But if you can spare $5 a month, if the show has been a part of your day or your week and you like what's going on here, Click in the show notes and support us any way you can. And then you will receive instant access right in your podcast player. You'll receive instant access to additional content. I will be publishing 3 additional episodes per month for supporters. One is a guided meditation, one is a nutrition lesson, and then one are the Q&A episodes that I've done on the podcast already. Those will go behind a paywall at this point, where I will be able to answer your questions from supporters. Once a month, I will do a Q&A episode. So all of the content will remain free that's currently published. And moving forward, the free content will be the interviews that I do, like this one with Dr. Hardy. But from now on, the Q&A episodes, nutrition lessons, and guided meditations will all be for supporters. Those will be exclusive content for supporters. So again, just click in the show notes, and it's super easy, just a couple taps, no logins, no extra apps to download, and the exclusive content will come directly into your podcast player. Thanks for considering it. I appreciate that in advance for those of you who do support the podcast. And as always, I'm so glad you're here. And now I will bring you this conversation with Dr. Jen Hardy. Hi, Jen. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast, and thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, Paige. Thanks. I'm really excited to be on this podcast. So thanks for inviting me on.
Well, we were talking before we started recording, and I was telling you how much I just love your content, and I just think that, your voice just really speaks to me. And so I'm really excited to have the chance to pick your brain a little bit today and talk about a topic that I think is near and dear to both of our hearts. So yeah, this will be great.
Yeah. I look forward to this conversation, and I might be picking your brain a little bit as we go along too, huh?
Well, that's the way I like it. I like these to be kind of discussion based, and sometimes it's a little bit more interviewee, and sometimes it's a bit more bouncing ideas off of each other. So I'm up for that if you are.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, awesome. So Jen, take a sec to just kind of talk about who you are, a little bit about what you do, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. Yeah, I am a psychologist in private practice in East Tennessee. I practice in the small town of Maryville, Tennessee, which is south of Knoxville. And I have a large part-time practice and treat individual people for individual psychotherapy. I'm a generalist, so I tell people that I specialize in relationships. And also career-related issue. I treat a lot of older adults, but really see people for a wide variety of things. I feel like a lot of issues come back to relationships and early life experiences, and so yeah. So I treat a little bit of everything and anyone that comes to my door, basically.
Awesome. And is that like a result of being in a small town, do you think, or just kind of what you love, kind of like to take it all, or?
I think it's just kind of my personality. I mean, if you've been following along with my Instagram account, I had thought initially, I was like, okay, maybe I'm supposed to think about my brand and care about like what is my brand and who am I speaking to? And that's something that's really hard for me to do because I like a little bit of everything. And it's just not really in my nature to specialize. And I like a little bit of everything. I like the variety. And so you see that in the kind of people that I work with and the kind of writing that I do. I guess I must get bored easily. So I like to switch things up a lot.
Well, that's actually really, I think, relevant to our topic today, because when you said I like a little bit of everything, I don't really want to just think of one type of person I'm talking to. I think that there's a real advantage to that, because it's my strong opinion that, we can kind of niche down and talk about, let's say, food, or let's say, anxiety or something like that. But the truth is, the skills you learn as you work on developing a healthier approach to food, or maybe even tools and skills for anxiety, like those are going to be expansive and they're going to be connected to other areas of life too, right? So it's kind of like, it's kind of silly to think that, oh, this is only relevant in this realm because it really, I don't know. I think that all these things are really connected, whether whatever struggle a person might have or something someone's going through, whatever they learn that's going to help them move forward will very likely be a skill or a tool or knowledge that then can help them in other areas of life. Would you agree, or what do you think
Yeah,
about that?
for sure. And I think that I was really fortunate to when I had first gone to graduate school, and I had selected programs somewhat based on location and what felt doable for me as a person straight out of undergrad heading into a graduate program. And I stumbled into a really great master's counseling program that had a fairly heavy focus on psychodynamic thinking and also feminist and systems thinking. And with both types of approaches, it's not a matter of disorder first. It's about connection and understanding the person as a whole person. Uh, so it's not symptom first, it's person first. And when you are thinking about a person in that whole, complex, nuanced way, um, you're just going to conceptualize the issues differently. And because
Yes.
of that, you tackle problems the way you're going to dissect that. Just it's going to be from a more general approach, I guess, if I'm making sense there.
No, that does make sense. Yeah, I love that. And the whole person rather than the quote disorder, right? Like what's the
Yeah.
context of your life? What have you been through? How were you raised? What's your history? Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, because I'm throwing out the term psychodynamic. So for listeners who don't know what that means, essentially what that approach would mean is that we believe that we are really influenced by early life experiences. These early life experiences with our primary caregivers and family and other people that were close to us when we were young, it influences the way that we look at ourselves, we look at other people, and look at the world. And we carry these patterns with us to help us stay safe and navigate the world as best we can. What happens later on is sometimes what fit in that environment, which may or not have been the healthiest environment, maybe doesn't fit and work for us in other environments because maybe those other ones are safer, or healthier, or maybe not as healthy. Um, and so I think those early experiences really matter. And then the flip side is the feminist perspectives of saying we can't just think of us as an individual in isolation, but we have to think of ourselves as existing within a culture and context, and realizing that there might be multiple cultures that we are connected to simultaneously, and and that brings a lot of complexity, and that we
Yeah.
have a lot of strength and resilience that can come from difficult life experiences.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, thanks for giving those definitions. I do like to make sure that whenever we throw out a word that potentially people won't understand or won't have heard of before, it's good to define them. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and both of those approaches aren't saying like, okay, here's this disorder that you've been diagnosed with, and then here is the treatment plan. This is what we do in session 1 and in session 2, like, manualized approaches to treatment. And they're not going to be as symptom focused, right? It's going to be about building up self-awareness so that you can act more intentionally.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So, when you and I were talking about kind of developing a theme or a topic for us to discuss today, do you want to kind of talk about what we want to talk about today and why you're excited to talk about it, why it resonates with you, and kind of any background or context you want to give there?
Sure. Well, when we were emailing back and forth, see, I ran into that same problem of I'm not a specialist. So, okay, what topic do I pick? It's not as readily apparent based on what I write about or the people that I work with. And so we were kind of throwing out ideas. And I remember that there was a post that I had done a few weeks ago. Actually, I had done it several months ago, and it really resonated with the people that follow my page. And so I reposted it. And I had some people message me or leave comments saying, please, can you expand on what this means some more? And I thought, yeah, that is a great idea. I need to try to think of some more posts. But I was struggling there because I think it's the limits of Instagram is we try to make as much space for nuance as possible, but it's hard to fit all of that complexity into a
Yeah,
little caption.
right.
So what the post was about was this idea that we can have binge restrict cycles that don't have anything to do with food, but are happening in other areas of our life, and that we need to be aware of this, so that we can try to disrupt those cycles. And I had thrown out some examples of, people might binge and restrict around spending habits, around spending time with friends and socializing. Uh, what are some other ones? Well, definitely with food or with exercise. Can you think of some others, Paige, that you've seen?
Yeah. Well, I
I
mean,
mean, or
yes.
you might say, well, let's talk about those.
No, I mean, so I think that it's really interesting to just kind of start off with why do we do this? What is it about our nature or nurture or culture, who knows? Why do we tend to kind of go all in or all out with things? What do you think about that?
See, I knew you would ask me that question. And I thought, man, that is a hard question. I better think about that. So I've been thinking about that for the last couple of days. And I'm going to throw out the standard, like, therapist answer of I think it depends. I think that the reasons why people might find themselves engaged in this binge restrict cycle, it's going to vary by the person. I think for some, they can say, well, I've watched my family members cope with stress and emotions in these types of ways. They've been models, and I have internalized those models. I think that we've certainly seen quite a lot of this in media messaging, advertising, especially like, with January 1st coming around saying like, okay, December is the big binge and January is to be the big month of restriction. And so we see these messages culturally. And I mean, those are two major ones. And I think we can get reinforcement for the restriction. And then we feel ashamed for the binges that we do. So I guess it depends,
Yeah,
right?
no, I like
I think,
that. I like the nuanced answer, right? Like it's not always easy.
yeah,
It's not a black and white. Oh, this is the clear reason why every single person might do this, right? It's never that
yeah.
simple.
And we might say, my parents didn't really engage in this stuff. And really where I picked this up was I started seeing this amongst friends in high school. And I decided to try this on for size myself. And I kind of got stuck in it, right? So it doesn't always come from our family, but it might come from other people that are influential in our lives.
Yeah.
And when we're in a cycle like this, what do they say? To help break out of their cycle, the cycle is to stop the restriction, right? We tend to focus on the binges, and we have emotional responses to that, a lot of shame or guilt or anger. And really what it's about to break these cycles is to break the restriction. And that's uncomfortable for people. They're like, do I really trust that?
Right. It does.
Right?
It comes down to trust, whether we're talking about trusting your body with feeding it adequately and enough, or trusting yourself to not, like when you've had enough experiences where you feel like you have binged or kind of engaged in more extreme behaviors with whatever it is that is true for you. I feel the very natural tendency is to say, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to ever do that again, so I'm going to make some rules around this. I'm going to cut this out. I'm not going to do this anymore." Like restriction makes sense like logically after binging, but it really only sets you
Yeah.
up for it, like continuing the cycle. and then breaking that through what you're saying of like, okay, we've got to look at the restriction part of the cycle. That does bring up all kinds of questions about, well, do I trust myself? And like, can I trust my body? Can I trust you telling me this? So,
Yeah.
yeah, what do you
And
think
when
about
I
that?
hear these messages around trust, you know, Erickson, again, we're getting back older than the psychodynamic therapist, but the psychoanalytic therapist would say, and the attachment theorist would say, our sense of trust is something that we start developing. That's like comes first. That comes during infancy. Can we trust our surroundings to be able to meet our needs and to be safe and consistent? And we start internalizing that, right? And we start asking those same questions of ourselves. Can I trust myself to be a safe person, a consistent person, someone that's going to be attending to my needs? And I think that people get that sense of trust violated by other people or by themselves. And it really hits to the core of some of our deepest emotional experiences. And so we can say, oh, it's about I spent too much time on Facebook and I really need to cut back. And so I'm going to restrict. But there is a layer of do I trust myself or not
Yeah, that
underneath that?
probably needs to be looked at in order to even look at the restriction. Is that what you're saying?
Mhm.
Like looking at your, like mindfully observing your sense of like trust is seems
Or,
to be pretty foundational for even working on these binge restrict cycles.
yeah, or even just paying attention enough to say, how am I really feeling? What's underneath all of the kind of the energy around when I am engaging with more time than is healthy or more money than is healthy with these behaviors, and then I'm trying to compensate in a different type of way. How am I really feeling if I allow myself to sit and not try to immediately come to an answer, but just like be in contact with myself, and what comes to the surface. And I think for a lot of people, it is these, fears around, do I trust myself? Am I competent? Do, do I have what I need to take care of myself?
Yeah, I love that. And Jen, you talk about how one of your big things is that you at least have on your website, and you kind of mentioned earlier, is that you really like working with people to help build healthier relationships. And I really
Mm-hmm.
that stood out to me because when I talk with people, like, so as a registered dietitian, when I talk with people about food and nutrition, I actually really like to use the metaphor of relationship, because like
Mm-hmm.
relationship with your body, relationship with food, because I think there's a lot of wisdom we can kind of glean from our intuitive knowledge of what does it look like to build a healthy relationship with another person? What happens if a person violates my trust? Or what happens when I might feel betrayed or have been betrayed by someone? Where do you go from there in a relationship context? I think sometimes I ask some of those questions because sometimes it can kind of help people see that the process of building trust with another person, it's not going to just be overnight, right? You don't just wake up and say, okay,
Right.
today I trust you. It's going to take time. It's going to take experimentation. It's going to take giving a little and then seeing what happens, and yeah, just more time under your belt of working on this. So with food and body, it's really interesting. People kind of want to just jump right in and say, okay, I want that peace. I want to trust myself. I want to not have this binging restricting cycle. I want to just be healed. Like, tell me what I need to do. Give me a meal plan, right? And
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and I try to kind of help them see, like, no, this is just like any relationship in your life, and building trust with yourself is going to look similarly. But I'm really interested to hear, like, what's your reaction to that, and what else would you add?
Well, it's interesting, as you were talking about that, I thought, oh yeah, it's like when I had to break up with watching reality television because it was not a good thing for me. But when I would watch reality television and you would see some of these models for the ways that people dealt with conflict. Like there was some big rupture in the relationship, right? And somebody had acted really, let's say, disrespectfully towards somebody else, and they were trying to sort it out. And then you might hear this message of, well, our relationship is new. It starts fresh today. None of all of that happened before. We're starting over. And they might even do some dramatic, like, hi, my name's Jen. And you'd be like, my name's Paige. And that's not how relationships work. The goal isn't to pretend that your life that happened before didn't happen. I think that that's trying to like skim over the hurt and the loss of the betrayal of trust, and right. And the work is actually in repairing and saying, okay, these problems didn't start overnight. They're not going to be fixed overnight. And that's okay, because change is hard, and it's okay to have it go slowly, and it's going to happen imperfectly. When you had asked me about, okay, what are healthy relationships? I thought that's a really hard thing to answer, because it's really easy to fall into this idea of people get this model of maybe a healthy relationship is a perfect relationship. And I've never seen a perfect relationship. I don't know if you have, but I know I haven't. And so it's about understanding that even the healthiest relationships they're gonna have problems in it.
That's a great
And
point.
that's okay.
Yeah. Yes. And that's another thing that we maybe might intuitively understand, just thinking about people in our life who we love, but who our relationship with them isn't perfect. Why do we assume our relationship with ourselves should be, you know?
Exactly, right? It's that darn perfectionism. I think in the catastrophic kind of all or nothing thinking, that they're mental shortcuts that our brain will make, right? We can create categories. There's an efficiency to that, but efficiency isn't always the same as accuracy,
Yeah, that's such a
right?
good point. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, within that, I think that there are some times where we can say, but here is a line that is never okay to cross, right? So, because I think the opposite can happen for people, right? So, some people can get really stuck on this rigidity of if it's not perfect, then it's unhealthy or they're toxic, or, we get into extreme thinking. But then other people can fall into the opposite trap, which is, um, I had somebody once years ago say to me, like, well, he's nice 95% of the time. And I said, well, what about the other five? And she's like, well, I'm scared he's going to kill me. And in all seriousness, right? That because they were in a really abusive relationship. And I thought, that 5% can beat out the 95%. You don't have to wait until 51% of the time you're scared. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like there can be people that think, well, it's not been bad enough times or for long enough, or it's good some of the time. So then I can't leave, because we can have the deal breakers, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that there are times when we are abusive towards ourselves, and maybe we've had some messaging from family and friends and culture that suggests that that is okay. And when I notice that in clients or in myself, it's important to bring awareness to that and say, I'm not allowed, like, that's against my ethics to be abusive to anybody, including myself.
Yeah. I love that.
Like it's not okay to punish myself because dot dot dot, like abusively punish. And we think of in when people are acting on eating disorder thoughts, it can sometimes seem pretty darn abusive. What are your thoughts on that? Do you ever use that language, or is there language that you would use instead?
No, I love that. I think that that's very, very true. And one thing that really tends to resonate well with my clients, and also I've recorded a podcast with a therapist about this idea of kind of dieting being the abusive like an abusive relationship where
Hmm.
you know, you can kind of get sucked back in and then you kind of get this resolve to leave and you're like, no, this isn't working for me. This is taking me further away from the life I want to live. This isn't what I want. But then it can be really seductive and alluring and kind of pull you back. And I talked in that episode. It was I'll remember what number it was and reference it later. But the therapist that I interviewed mentioned that on average it takes about 7 times to leave an abusive relationship. And so she talked about how like if it resonates for you that dieting and the alluring nature of like the language around like just cut this out and then you'll have this life and then you'll have this body, like if you find yourself kind of dipping your toes in and out of dieting and getting the resolve to leave and then falling kind of finding yourself back in there, just kind of
Hmm.
recognizing that's a very normal process of like with abusive relationships. So I thought that was really interesting, and a lot of people have reached out letting me know that that's a really helpful kind of way to view it, because I think a lot of the rhetoric around intuitive eating and around even body positivity, that kind of thing, kind of makes it feel like you just should have this moment where you awaken to the perils of trying to manipulate your body and the dangers of restriction and how much that sends you down the direction you don't want to go with food, and you should just like love your body every second and the end. And again, that kind of, I believe that stems from the nature of how people are consuming this information. It's mostly online,
Hmm.
and so there
Yeah.
is a lot of nuance that gets lost in the shuffle. And a lot of my clinical work right now is trying to help people find that middle ground of like, of course, you're going to have days where you're not totally loving every part of your body. Of course, you're going to have times where you're really kind of like feeling intoxicated by this sweeping promises of dieting. Like that's okay. That's normal. So now I'm like wondering if I feel like I'm rambling, but what do you think about that?
No, I think that that's true. Because again, I think it comes back to some cultural messaging, and you'll hear these stories of, these figures. I think of a great uncle who one day he was a longtime smoker, and just his story, he was good at telling a good story. So you feel like maybe some details were lost for the sake of an interesting plot line. But he was like, one day I was leaving the factory and I said, I don't want to smoke anymore. And they're like, and he never picked up another cigarette again. And you're like, okay, what's it? Okay, so that happened for him, but I feel like there's more to this story that's getting left out, right? And
Yes,
so
there
people
definitely
hear
is.
these things and they
Yeah.
think, well, her great uncle did it, so why can't I? And I'm thinking, he clearly was going through withdrawal symptoms from the nicotine and he was dealing with cognitions, and did he really never ever have a cigarette again, or what was he having some other compensatory behaviors to help him? Like, there's more to this story, but we like simple stories, and the truth is there are no simple stories. And so I think a lesson I have learned through my life, and I think being a therapist and you realize just how complicated people's stories are, is reminding myself there are no simple stories. And so if I'm getting told one, I need to know that they are skimming over a lot of information.
Oh, that just
Because, yeah,
resonates with me so hard. I love that.
this change is hard. And you know what? I'm maybe not entitled to every detail of their story, and that's okay. They don't owe me all, my great uncle didn't owe me as a 8-year old when he's telling me this story or whatever. He didn't owe me all the details of it. But I think it's also that idealizing is hard because people get rewarded for it, and people say, well, so and so did, it shuts people off from being able to share authentically about the struggles that they have, right?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I can think of multiple examples in my own life of, something big happening for me and people ask me about it and it's kind of like, "Oh, the minute I try to even turn that into words, it really doesn't even illustrate at all what I went through or what it felt like or the pain I experienced or whatever, right? It's kind
Yeah.
of like telling stories is what we love as humans, but it's also really risky in terms of leaving out kind of the messiness and the gray because it's kind of like, well, here's the ending. Here's where I ended up, but man, to get there, this is what it was like. It's not everybody really wants to hear about that too, right? Kind of like
Yeah,
the neat and clean stories.
it's not very glamorous to get into the nitty-gritty details, right? People say, okay, kind of hurry up through this early stuff here and get to where it gets good.
Yeah.
And you're like, but you know, that's not how life goes. So I think if people have a takeaway, remembering there are no simple stories. And if you're being sold a simple story, and I think Instagram, social media can start painting these simple stories and saying, okay, they don't owe me the whole thing, and I can know there's more to it than this. And if you can just start noticing all of that messaging around change comes quick and easy and say, wait a second, I get the right to be a little skeptical about that. It starts changing the way you start looking at yourself. You tend to not feel as frustrated that change comes slowly.
That is so beautiful. Oh my, I just love that so much. That is, I think we could all think of examples of where we might compare our reality to someone else's story that they're putting out there and think, gosh, what have I not figured out that other people have? I think that's super
Yeah,
relevant
yeah.
to the conversation about like body image and body positivity because, you know, when you're just scrolling through social media and seeing all these people who are like, I've learned to love every part of my body, you know, again, very simple story. And also, I think your point about being skeptical doesn't mean you don't believe people, but at the same time, you might also think, okay, that's where this person might be right here, right now in this moment. But, you know, what about last night? Or what about tomorrow? Or what about 5 minutes from now? You know? Um,
Yeah.
or what
And
about what
and
they think
maybe
people want to hear, too? Right?
yeah, and if they were talking with you one on one and they could tell that you are a kind, compassionate person, they may be willing to share more of the story with you than they are willing to share to, we all know, various kinds of people that are out in these public spaces and maybe they're not also kind. I'm not trying to let people off the hook that are, presenting these really unhelpful diet messaging that contributes to body image problems. I can see where they are a part of a problematic system. And so I'm not going to like focus on fault finding and blaming individuals, but understand how like this is all created in a really large cultural system.
Yeah, tough on systems, soft on people. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great way of saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. I think that's a really healthy way to engage and interact online because I think sometimes we tend to get really just bugged by some of the messaging we see there, but maybe the instinct you have to like just rage or be angry at this person, maybe it can be helpful to kind of take a step back and be like, wait a minute, like in a way, I don't want to excuse them, but in a way, like they're definitely like part of this bigger system that's super problematic. And in a lot of cases, people don't even maybe know the harm that they're doing, I'd say too.
Oh, yeah, I think that we can cause a lot of harm even with our good intentions, and we are still
Yes.
responsible
Yes.
for the outcomes of what we say and do. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Look at
Okay,
all that
so
nuance there. It's messy.
nuance, that's my favorite word. I don't know if you know that about me, but that's my favorite word. Um, okay, so this
So,
idea of why do we binge and restrict? I want to throw an idea your way and kind of get your thoughts on it.
okay.
So, obviously like I know food and that's kind of like my scope. That's what I do day in, day out, but I'm also interested to hear kind of what connections this sets off in your brain of what you've seen with your work and your expertise. So I have noticed that explaining the binge restrict cycle to people makes makes a lot of intuitive sense on like a physical level. Most people can understand, okay, if you know, don't eat anything in the morning and then eat this tiny little wimpy lunch and then don't eat anything else until like 5 or 6 at night. If you're wondering, why am I feeling so out of my mind and just reaching for every food I can find? And that just goes on all night long until I go to bed. And then I'm way too full and I feel kind of just like, oh, I feel,
Hmm.
like I've definitely overridden some of my fullness cues or whatever. That, like, I can usually, it's fairly intuitive for people when I say, okay, well, what would it feel like to show up at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock having eaten like full satisfying meals and having your body kind of be a normal level of hunger? Do you think that you would find yourself, just kind of ravenous and reaching for everything? And most people are like, oh yeah, I think maybe the more I could spread that out, the more kind of connected I might feel to my body, whatever.
And
um
see, even in that, I think that is them taking a step to trust you
yeah, good point.
in your expertise to say, I think that page is telling me another way of living that has worked for her and maybe for others, right?
Yeah.
Right, there's trust right there. I'm sorry, I interrupted, but it seemed uh, meaningful to name that. So you were talking about that, and then we're going to connect it. It sounds like outside of the world of food.
Yeah, so where people struggle is when I explain, like, sometimes binging or overeating or whatever word you want to use, sometimes that seems to come out of nowhere for people, and people are like, no, no, I am eating. Like, it's not that I'm super hungry. It's not that I'm restricting myself. So maybe I'm this weirdo who this restriction binging cycle doesn't relate to me. And then I try to explain, beyond the physical restriction, there is this phenomenon that happens where just the very act of, like, let's say it's 8 o'clock at night and you have eaten stuff that you deem not, what you should be doing, quote unquote, or like off your plan or whatever, something that makes you feel like you've failed. Okay.
Hmm.
Like, the very act of you in your mind saying, okay, tomorrow I'm not going to do this. Tomorrow and you're making plans of how you're going to, quote, like, make up for that or do better, quote unquote, which I'm using quotes because
Yeah,
this
you
is
may not agree
problematic.
with that,
Right.
right? Yeah.
But this is what happens for people in their mind. And I try to help them understand that just promising yourself that you're going to restrict tomorrow, often what that ends up doing in the present moment for you is it kind of just says, well, screw it. Now's my chance. Tomorrow I'm not going to let myself do this. So here I go. And it can
Hmm.
actually really, like, exacerbate binges or overeating episodes or those types of things. So I'm interested to know, do you see a different, like, a distinction between kind of sometimes the physical restriction versus more like the mental restriction in other areas of life?
I mean, I feel like you can see it some in spending habits. You'll see this, right? Like somebody gets their credit card bill and they say, "Oh no." And they kind of know it's coming, right? Or they're scared because they're just like way over budget and how am I going to pay for these expenses that I have, right? And then they decide that they're going to buckle down and really be tight and they're never going to eat out. They're never going to do this. They're never, never, never restrict, restrict, restrict. And the hard thing about that restriction is there is probably a reason that, well, there's a few different reasons with that, right? Because sometimes we have needs that need to get met, right? Like maybe you need to purchase, I don't know, um, you need some new clothes because you have something going on at work where you need appropriate clothes, but you have told yourself you can't. Or, you set up all these rules around no, 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 and the rigidity. And I think that what can happen is people there is a sense of control and power on the front end, and on the back end there's a sense of like helplessness
Oh,
and
yeah.
loss of control, or
Yeah.
feeling unsafe by the control you've given up, and so then we will want to rebel against it, and then you get caught in these internal waves of I've spent all this money on hanging out with friends, so I'm not allowed to hang out with friends ever. And then you start getting lonely and your friendships start suffering because, you're not spending time with anybody and doing anything. And then you go and next thing you say, I don't like that. And then you're overcompensating. And then what you're doing is you're just stuck in these cycles of overcompensating for extremes.
Yeah, and
Um,
people don't tend to sometimes even have lived experience in the middle, right? Like
mhm.
that can feel kind of scarier than living in the extremes because that's what they're used to.
So here's another example that I will give is that I work with it, I work with a lot of people who do not regularly exercise, and we know that exercise and healthy movement can definitely have positive impacts on mood and reducing anxiety level. But people will say, "Oh, I hate exercise." And my thought is, well, probably because you've done it in this binge restrict kind of way. So let's think about what that typically means. They head into the gym and they are not allowed to leave until they have felt totally miserable and exhausted and completely sore. Right? Like if I'm going to go to the gym, and they start getting in that lecture mean coach voice. If I'm going here, no pain, no gain. like making it a really miserable experience. And then they leave, and, do they want to go back to the gym the next day? Not really. And it's miserable and uncomfortable. And so when I try to encourage people to exercise, here's what I say. I say, I don't care what you even do when you get there. You can go to the gym and say, my body says it's tired and it can't do anything today. And that's fine. Just sit on the couch and then leave after 20 minutes or whatever. Or if you go there, try to go there, but when you're exercising, always be able to talk. Like, don't have getting in shape be this punishing experience. Have it be something where you are being a kind person to yourself and saying, this, I'm not going to get in shape overnight. And that's okay. It's about like just letting my body move because our bodies are made to move. And and understanding that this is going to take a while, but every little bit can help. And that feels like a kind of middle path, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're so right that if you have the thought, "Oh man, I just hate movement and exercise." That might be true, but it also might be true that the only way you've ever done it is with that very all or nothing binge restrict type of approach. And a lot of
Like
times,
abusively.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the truth is like I mean the terminology of like it feeling like an abusive like way of treating yourself kind of makes sense to me that that wouldn't be sustainable because I think we don't it's not authentic. It's not authentic to ourselves to be beating ourselves up and to be punishing ourselves and to be mean to ourselves. I think if we can find a way for whether it's movement or shopping or food or whatever it is, we can find a way for it to feel like it's coming from a place of like nurturing and joy and compassion and like, you know, good solid motivators. I think that that's going to feel very different.
Yeah. And so I say, it doesn't have to be that you get a gym membership. Maybe it just is if you are in Walmart and you have felt this. Well, so with anxiety, what can happen is I can say, okay, is the anxiety, or do you think it's like a buildup of energy in your body? And this is where we have to learn how to tune into our body. And our body has to learn that we're going to listen to it and respect it enough to listen to what it has to say. Right. And so as we get better at this, we can figure out, is this an anxiety that maybe I can burn off some of this energy? Or is it an anxiety where maybe I need to distract myself or do some other kind of soothing? But again, this we have to build a relationship with ourselves. And if we've been taught and what we've done for a long time is neglect ourselves, it's going to take a little bit of time and getting it wrong and getting it right and listening to that feedback and learning. And I can say this is something that I've practiced for a really long time. And so I can sit and listen to my body for a while quietly, and I can say, okay, I think that this is the kind of tired that says I need to move versus this is the kind of tired that says I need a nap.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to put those sensations into words because they're so intuitive and maybe unique to my own experience in my own body that might be different from somebody else's.
But even just, hearing that through time and through practice and through getting it wrong and getting it right and just continuing to move forward and do the best you can, even just hearing, hey, at some point you'll be able to detect like, oh yeah, this is the kind of tired that means moving would really energize me, or this is the kind of tired that means I really need to take a nap right now. I think that's cool for people to know that that's possible, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting how subtle some of this stuff is. Um, where, because it could be oh, this is kind of the anxious of I've had too much caffeine, or I'm putting too much pressure on myself to move too quickly. And I think if I just sort of slow down and reset my expectations, then I can kind of settle in and soothe. Um, we we grew up in a country that very much is kind of like a let's see how quickly we can get our babies and our toddlers and our kids to be independent. We're really into self-soothe, um, but we don't actually really teach self-soothing skills. And so people can struggle with that, right? Like, I know you have kids. We talked, I have kids, you have kids, and we know that these are lessons that take a while to build, and we teach them by showing them. But unfortunately, the as new parents, what we tend to learn is like babies will figure it out on their own. You shouldn't be doing it for them. And in reality, like this stuff takes a long time. So some
Yeah.
of this for people might be like, okay, this is the remnants of my caregivers getting messages that it wasn't okay for them to soothe me, that they were supposed to, you know, leave me to figure it out. And that I might just still be stuck in learning how to do some of that stuff. But now that I'm an adult, I can parent myself and probably speed the process along faster as long as I, give myself some compassion and patience and care.
Love it. So, Jen, what if someone's listening and they're like, okay, my thing that I can identify in my life that I tend to fall into this binge restrict cycle with? What if someone's thinking, yeah, but my thing, I really do need to restrict it. I really, I can't look at restriction because it's just gotta happen. Um, what are your thoughts about that?
Hmm. Well, I'm trying to think of an example here. Like, so I have kids that have food allergies. So, right, that is a medical necessity to restrict allergen. And that's a tough one, right? Because as a parent, I know that that's a tough thing because I don't want to set up a lot of restrictive thinking. And so what we try to do is uh, come up with alternatives so that they don't feel like they're missing out, but that they feel like they're just getting an alternative experience that also feels good. Um, yeah. And
I'll
also,
jump
I
in
think
there too.
just feeling your feelings about it. If you're sad because you really want to be able to have this thing and you're out of money and you cannot buy this thing, it's okay to feel sad or to feel angry about that. It's okay to have your feelings about it because then you can maybe work through it and get to the other side, right? And what are
Yeah.
your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, I think I'm always really intrigued by how much language tends to matter with this stuff. And so if first of all, I would encourage people to look at like what is the yeah, but I really need to restrict this. Like look at that first because if there's some if there's something that you're kind of thinking you need to restrict, but really there's some room for some balance, that might end up leading to like more peace and well-being and feeling good about it. Because if you're saying, if you're listening to this and you're identifying, yeah, I do tend to binge with this, but I really need to restrict it, so I'm going to keep restricting it. If binging is continuing to happen, I would just really take a good hard look at the necessity of the restriction for you. Um, and
Yeah, I
if
think it's being honest and saying, well, clearly this restricting isn't working,
Right,
and maybe I need to try a different way that has worked for other people.
right. I love it. But with this example you're giving about food allergies, even sometimes shifting some of the language around it can be really helpful. So something like, um, and food allergies is a little harder because there's,
But what I do is I will say, if you miss out, guess what? You're going to miss out in that moment, but we are creative, smart people, and we will think of a fun alternative. And so if they miss out on the cupcake, well, they already know, well, we have cupcakes, that's cool. But if they miss out on something, they know that I will always come through for them. And at the end of the school day, if they say, well, I missed the ice cream, I'll say, okay, what treat do you want to get? What should we get? And
yeah,
they know, like, there's not this, like, I don't know. It's a bummer. It's a bummer when you're a kid and you can't get the thing that looks really delicious, right?
it is a
And I
bummer.
don't want to start up the, yeah, I don't want to start up the, had this restricted for me. And so now, so there's not this restriction. It's just, okay, I might have to wait a little bit longer than the other kids did,
Ah,
but
yeah.
I'm not going to miss out and have those feelings, right? That might make me want to binge and compensate more later.
Yeah.
So we'll go and get a donut or something, right? We'll go get something fun. One other thing that I wanted to share that I think might be related generally to this idea of binging and restricting, and it's kind of fitting because she lives in Salt Lake City. Are you familiar with Lorna Benjamin?
No.
Lorna Smith Benjamin. She was a psychology professor at the University of Utah, and she retired a few years ago.
Oh, she
But
like a feminist? Is her work
uh,
around feminism?
Well, I would say she's probably a generally in feminist
Okay.
theory, but actually she's more psychodynamic attachment based. She works with people who have chronic severe suicidal thinking and has developed some therapy approaches to help people with chronic and severe suicidal thoughts. And but she's a great theorist and anyway, one of the things that she had taught was this idea of, okay, those early experiences that we have, they are really influential on the way that we view ourselves. I said this at the beginning, view ourselves, view the world, view other people. And somebody had asked her the question of, well, how do we learn patterns from our parents that maybe they learned from their caregivers, right? Like how does this transmission happen? And I just really love the simplicity of this, but also how fitting it is. She talked about three different copy processes. And one copy process is act like your caregiver. So if you grew up in a really authoritarian home that was really rigid and strict and controlling, you can find yourself acting in a similar way, right? And right. And then the second one is act like your caregiver is around. And so to take that same example, they might say, well, so you might find yourself kind of acting in a rigid, controlling, authoritarian way, or you might find yourself acting in your world outside of your family relationships, how you responded to that rigidity. And so that might be you being quite rebellious. It might be you people pleasing or trying to be a perfectionist. Just if I can just be really good at balancing on all the eggshells, maybe I won't crack any. And then the third copy process that we work a lot on in therapy is treat yourself like your caregiver treated you. And that, I think, right there is where people find themselves internalizing that authoritarian, rigid, controlling, or maybe they grew up in a
Mm,
chaotic life and they find
yeah.
themselves sort of treating themselves in an unpredictable way where sometimes they're responsive, sometimes they're neglectful, and it kind of feels all over the place. And I think it's useful to say this is where these patterns have come from and they've been around for a while, and there's an opportunity to shift that. Some I know I'm giving you a lot of information on this,
This
but
is
there
wonderful.
yeah, there's been some beautiful studies where they have looked at how do people change in therapy coming from this type of idea of this introject, this how do I treat myself is based on how others have treated me, my caregivers did. And what they found is over the course of therapy, when people's symptoms were starting to get better, is they started treating themselves more like they saw their therapist treating them.
Oh, wow.
And they're like, whoa.
Oh, that's so
Isn't that
beautiful.
so cool?
Yeah.
And you know what session they were looking at when they were looking at change and the way we are treating them ourselves?
What?
It was session 4.
Wow.
So it's not like this is something where it has to take months and years of therapy. You can start noticing some subtle shifts in this, maybe, 4, 7, 10 sessions in. It doesn't mean all of the work is done, but it's you're noticing it in subtle ways.
So let me see if I can kind of like summarize what I'm hearing and
Yeah,
see if
I
you're,
gave you a lot there.
yeah. So what you're saying is the way that we have been treated by our caregivers will very often inform how we end up treating ourselves, which makes a lot of
Hmm.
intuitive sense. I totally see that.
Yeah.
And when the way that we were treated was something that wasn't ultimately super helpful for us, or maybe really causes issues in our life, and maybe is part of the reason why we end up in therapy, it sounds like the therapist can model some of that more compassionate, kind, caring inner dialogue that then can
Hmm.
kind of become the client's self-talk. Does that sound right, or what did I get
Yeah.
wrong there?
Yeah, no, you got that right. And it doesn't just have to be within therapy, right? People will talk about like, well, this friend, this connection, it has to be somebody that you feel a deep attachment towards. It's not just anybody. It's somebody that you've identified as a caregiver or an attachment figure. Attachment figure means somebody that you believe is stronger and wiser than you and that you have a connection with, right? And that they are
Okay,
offering you some
that's
type of
so
care,
interesting.
right? So it might be a teacher
It
that
might
you
be a
have
teacher, it
developed,
might be a
right?
dietitian.
It might be a dietitian,
Yeah,
exactly, right?
yeah,
Because you
wow.
work with people for potentially quite a long time, right? Or you see them pretty frequently and they're coming to you because, you know, they need your help.
Right. Right. And
And
a
it
lot
might
of the
be a
work
partner,
that
it
I
could be
do
any
is
number.
kind of helping people be more curious about what's happening in their body, and what's happening as they approach food or think about food or plan their food, and modeling sort of like that is, it's really interesting to put a name to it, because that is a lot of what I'm trying to help cultivate for people, is more curiosity, more just
Right. Curiosity and
experimentation, less judgment.
respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, less judgment, respect,
Yeah.
empowering them. You're attending to them, you're listening to them.
Yeah, and I have to say that there was one experience I had where someone shared that um, that they had shared something that had happened between us in a session, that they just wanted to kind of say like, this didn't work for me, or this is what I heard, or this is what I need, and kind of really stood up for herself in a very
Hmm.
compassionate way toward me. But not the world's easiest conversation for her to bring up. But she also shared like, that was so cool to have the chance to advocate for myself, because I've never done that. So like, she even was able to say, thank you for giving me the chance to do that with you. And it's those kinds of moments that have nothing to do with nutrition, but that perhaps are part of how people can start to develop more of that self-compassion and more of that willingness and ability to like advocate for what they need, which then definitely translates into how they care for themselves.
Yeah, and if we realize that, rupture, conflict is unavoidable, it's not necessarily like always a bad thing when we are working with people who are trustworthy and respectful, like they've earned our trust, it it can turn out really well, right?
Yeah.
We tend to not want to have conflict constantly, right? But when we learn, like, okay, I have the skills to work through this conflict and it'll be okay, and we can be better on the other side, I think that's a really beautiful thing. And clearly, she anticipated that you were a safe enough person that she could share that information with you, right? And that
Yeah.
there were good odds it was going to turn out okay.
Yeah, which I felt super honored that we were able to do that. So, Jen, this has been such a great conversation about like hopefully prompting people to kind of consider outside of food and body and exercise, or maybe even if that's what's resonating the most, looking there too, but noticing these patterns of binging and restricting and your gentle invitation of, looking more at the restriction rather than always trying to prevent the binging through more restriction, I think is such a good point. Is there anything else that you want to make sure to say or kind of wrap up about or summarize?
I guess the one thing that I would add is if you say, man, if I look around me, I just don't really know of any models of anyone in my family or in my close relationships right now who are able to like model this healthy balance. This is where I think working with a dietitian, working with a therapist, identifying maybe you see someone in your life, you're like, well, that person that I'm not particularly close to, I'm a little bit close to, they seem to have some things figured out. People are probably more willing to help you and give you some mentoring and support than you realize. And so maybe start by reaching out to them and say, can we have coffee sometime? I just want to like pick your brain about some things and how you figured these things out. And if there isn't really anyone like that in your life, that's where a therapist, a dietitian, a professional that has a lot of experience and has the kind of shared wisdom that they've built up from all of the other clients that they've worked with before. This is how we can be helpful.
I
You
love
don't
the
have to do this
idea.
alone. It's hard.
Yeah, I love the idea of like just having a direct conversation with someone that you admire, you look up to, you think could share some wisdom with you, and just saying, I like what you've got going on. Like tell me how you came to this, tell me how you approach this. I if someone said that to me, like in my personal life, I would be so thrilled. And I can also think of people in my life who I want to sit down with and have that conversation with
Mhm.
too. That's seems so refreshing, socially too, to be in that place of really just talking about stuff that matters. Because sometimes we
Yeah,
don't
and
always do that with
if
people, you
you're
know?
right, we don't have these connections, but they're really meaningful. And if you have fears of, well, what if they only are going to say yes because they feel obligated to, sit with that and say, is that my fear? Or do I suspect that perhaps they have not actually, they are maybe not as healthy as I think that they are, that they wouldn't be assertive enough to say no if they
Ooh,
needed to say no,
good
right?
point. Yeah,
Because I have from time to time, like especially like I might get a direct message from somebody who I've never met saying, I need your advice right now. And I'd be like, I can't do that. Like I have a boundary and I can't. And that so I have said no to people before, but in my personal life, if I have friends or people I'm
yeah.
connected to and they're wanting some thoughts or mentoring or like how have you figured this out, yeah, I mean, that's the only way I got where I am at now is I've had a lot of advice and support and mentoring from people that have come before me.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have
for
not figured
sure.
this all out on my own. I've gotten help from lots of people.
Lots of wise
We all
people
have.
who have done lots of great work in their lives, kind of passing it down and sharing and having those opportunities to connect is such a gift. I mean, to me, that's really life is all about, is those types of conversations, those types of willingness to be like vulnerable and open with each other and connect. It's so beautiful.
It's all about relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jen, tell everybody where they can find you and follow your work and work with you if they happen to be local to you.
Sure. So I have a website. If you live locally, I can only treat people that can come to my office. I don't do telehealth, and I'm
Okay.
licensed only in the state of Tennessee.
And I will post
I
your
have a
website
part-time,
too. Yeah.
yeah, I have a part-time practice, so I often do not have openings because I do long-term therapy predominantly, and I'm in part-time practice. So, but you can go there and see everywhere that I've been on the internet in terms of podcasts like this or interviews that I've done. It's on that website. I also have a newsletter that I send out about every 3 months. It's quarterly. The main place to find me, though, would be on Instagram, and I post there daily or sometimes twice a day. And my, is it a handle, my profile name,
Yeah.
whatever that is Dr. Jen Hardy.
With two N's.
Dr. Yep. JENNHERDY. Yeah.
Well, Jen, this has been really lovely conversation. I'm so glad that you are willing to give us some of your time and expertise and wisdom. I'm so grateful for you coming on the show. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me and thanks for doing podcasts like this. I had a chance to listen to some of your episodes and it's really great stuff. It's if only this stuff was this readily available when I was like in high school and college,
Mm.
that would have been I would have figured things out a lot faster than I did. So I think that it's great that we've started to start making this so free and accessible to people. So thank you for what you're doing to help
Oh,
give
you're
back.
welcome. Yeah, it's stuff I wish I had as a high schooler and college student too, honestly. Like I wish someone someone had told me some of these things, saved me a lot of time and headaches, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
All right, well, thank you so much and we'll talk soon. This month on Nutrition Matters Premium, I am teaching a nutrition lesson about emotional eating. I am doing a guided meditation, kind of getting you oriented to meditation. And I will be answering questions from subscribers and supporters, all available in Nutrition Matters Premium, which you can access by clicking in the show notes, become a supporter at glow.fm/nutrition matters, or just click the link and it just takes 2 links. And I love to see you in there. Thank you. Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.